Okay, we're live.
Thank you, Lisa. Good evening, everyone. This is the Silverton Board of Trustee meeting on July 13th. The time is now 7:03 and I call this meeting to order. Nathan, if you would please do the roll call.
Sure thing. Trustee Barella?
Here.
Trustee Harper?
Here.
Trustee Weggert?
Here.
Trustee Bierma?
Here.
Trustee Lashley?
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Barney?
Here.
Mayor Furman?
Here. Administrator Ryder, would you like to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Certainly. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Do any staff or trustees have revisions to the agenda this evening?
Staff does. We would respectfully ask to move the consideration to approve the Hard Rocker special event application to just after the first public comment, item number 2.
Any objections? Great. Any other revisions? In that case, we will now open the meeting up to public comment. If you are participating via Zoom, there's a raise hand button on your screen, or I believe the pound button on the phone if you're calling in. And now would be the time if you'd like to make a comment.
If you're calling in, it's actually *9.
Ah, thank you, Lisa. *9.
You're welcome.
And there will be another public comment period at the end of the meeting. Seeing that we have no comments, we will now move to the approval of the consent agenda. Are there any items that need to be pulled from the consent agenda for discussion, or is everybody good with what's included? All right, I would consider is this where we take a motion to approve the consent agenda? And if so, I would consider such a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Thank you, Trustee Lashley. Do I hear a second?
I can second it.
Thank you, Trustee Bierma. Nathan, roll call, please.
Trustee Barella?
Yes.
Trustee Harper?
Yes.
Trustee Weggert?
Yes.
Trustee Bierma?
Yes.
Trustee Lashley?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Barney?
Yes.
Mayor Furman?
Yes, and in my eagerness to move through, I blatantly disregarded Administrator Ryder's request to move the new business item to right after the public comment. And so fortunately, we didn't have much comment there, and I will now move the new business item to now, which is the consideration to approve Hard Rocker special event application.
And Lisa Branner, if you would be so kind to give a brief overview. This is obviously a historical event that we've always supported. I don't think there's any major change in operation with the exception of the applicant working with OEM and developing the appropriate social distancing and COVID related measures. They are also asking for a fee waiver, which they have historically been granted. And other than that, Lisa, is there anything you'd like to describe or talk about related to this application? And
I think you covered most of it, Administrator Ryder. And as you mentioned, they are working with the Office of Emergency Management to make sure that all of their events are in compliance with current regulations regarding COVID-19. I know there's some events that will not be happening because they put people in too close proximity to each other. But, you know, as with all of the other events that have come before the trustees this summer, your approval will be conditional upon them meeting the requirements that the Office of Emergency Management asks of them. And there is information in your packet about what the fees associated with this event are over at Kendall. So it's banner, the cost of the banners, both at the entrance to town and right at the Kendall entrance at 14th Street, and then a waiver of fees for the facility rental. They typically use the grounds and the restrooms, but they're not actually in the building itself. And Judy Kuhlman is on the line. I can go ahead and activate her if anybody has questions and would like to speak directly with her.
Do any trustees have any questions or discussion items?
Am I unmuted?
You
Yep, we
are
can hear you.
unmuted, Judy.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody have any questions for me?
Trustee
Yes.
Brewer?
So I'm assuming it's some of the kids' events and maybe the tug of war that are going to be off the agenda this year, Judy?
We are definitely eliminating the kids' events, but we're going to try and have the tug of war by dropping the team members from 5 on the board to 4. That way, each team member is facing in opposite directions, and the double anchor is facing backwards against the anchor. So nobody will be face to face.
Wonderful. Thank you. It's a great event. We should always support it.
Yes,
Trustee Harper?
Hey Judy, this is Jim Harper here.
Hi.
I just want to say thank you for keeping this historic event alive. Thank you for all your family does.
well, I'm doing my best, really am. And with your
Thank you.
support, we can keep it going.
We're trying.
Thank you.
I had a couple of process-oriented questions more for Administrator Ryder. One is, I understood from the initial presentation of the budget that you placed a cap on the number of events at fee waivers we can have, and I believe that's around $10,000. And so I was just wondering if we're anticipating any other material fee waiver requests over the rest of the year. This obviously seems like a high priority event to waive fees for, but since it's more than half of the requested budget on fee waivers, I just wanted to make sure that we're being fair to any other annual events that we normally have.
I am not aware of any. I would also defer to Lisa Branner if she's aware of any. There inevitably will be some, Mr. Mayor. I am not aware of anything significant. And to update the board, the original budget for this discretionary type of fee waiving was $10,000. We haven't waived anything this year. And our projected, we've lowered it a bit to 6,300, and that is still available.
Just to follow up on what other events might be requesting waivers, I do know that the Silverton Creative District is preparing an application, and there will be some nominal amounts that they're asking for. Basically, it'll be a public right-of-way closure, and that's only really a partial closure of the sidewalk. It doesn't prohibit people from moving through. And I would anticipate we'll see a lot fewer requests this year, just given the situation with COVID-19. I'm not anticipating many more events, number one, to happen, or number two, to ask for waivers.
Great. And then in addition to staff hours, is there any cost to the town associated with the event?
No.
Awesome.
Unless you did, does Mavis clean, Lisa, after this event, given the limited use?
She will clean the bathrooms, but Judy does also maintain them throughout the weekend so that they are in decent shape by the time Mavis gets in there to do her cleaning.
I see Trustee Birma's hand. I had one more question, which is, I recognize that Lisa and Judy and Administrator Ryder have all mentioned working with the OEM team, but do we need that to be part of the application in order to approve it? Or is the note in this meeting sufficient?
I would say, Mr. Mayor, it's part of the application that they work with OEM. So upon approval, it's more or less becoming a mandate that they work with OEM. So I think we're covered.
Hello?
Thank you. Yeah, Judy?
Yes, I have presented a proposal to the OEM describing all the different events and how we plan on distancing them, etc. And basically, I have been more or less kind of approved on everything so far.
Fantastic, thank you. And Trustee Birma, you had your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. Well, first of all, thank you, Judy, for organizing this and putting it on. It's an awesome event. I've participated in it before and had a lot of fun. I just noticed a really nitpicky thing, and I noticed on the liquor liability exposures, questions 2 and 4 weren't filled out, but very minor, which is page 62 on our.
And just so you all are aware, they did go before the Liquor Licensing Authority last week, I believe, and got approval there. So they're all set as far as that goes. And then the other thing I'd like to say about the OEM approval is with every special event that we do, we need to run it, depending upon what the parameters of the event are, we run it by the Public Works Department, we run it by the sheriff, OEM, the ambulance. If necessary, we run it by the fire department. It just depends upon what elements the event includes. And I would say in times of COVID, it's really important that the OEM office be able to sign off on something like this at the very last minute, because things are changing on pretty much a daily basis. So I would encourage the trustees to have faith in the process, that we are coordinating closely with the OEM office, and Jim Donovan is very well aware of all of the elements of this event and has been working closely with Judy. And if there's something that comes up at the last minute, he'll be coordinating with us then as well. So that's one of those things where I'd encourage you to give your conditional approval, knowing that your staff and the other departments in the community are working as they need to make sure everybody stays safe.
Wonderful, thank you. So do I hear a motion to approve the Hard Rocker special event application contingent upon working with the OEM team and subject to any modifications needed based on fire restrictions and any other emergency management requirements?
I'd like to make a motion to support, whatever we're going to call it, Hard Rockers for approval based on the conditions that were already laid out.
Sally,
I'll
sorry,
second.
Mayor Pro Tem Barney.
I'll second the motion.
Thank you. Nathan, roll call, please.
Trustee Barella,
Yes.
Trustee Harper,
Yes.
Trustee Weggert,
Yes.
Trustee Birma,
Yes.
Trustee Lashley,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Barney,
Yes.
Mayor Furman.
Yes. Well, Judy, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for putting on this event, and we look forward to seeing it well executed.
Well,
Thank
thank you very much for your approval. I will take it to the committee and we will proceed from here.
Thank you, Judy.
Thank you.
All right.
And Mr.
Moving-
Mayor, if I could point
Yes.
out, we did pass over Oh, I guess we didn't. I'm sorry. We put never mind. We did do the consent agenda ahead of the presentation by Sheriff Conrad.
My agenda doesn't show.
There was an updated one sent out that included the fire ban ordinance and a presentation, so maybe you didn't. And we can wait if we want for Sheriff Conrad until the fire ban ordinance consideration. That would be fine too.
Oh, I think we should probably go in the order of the amended agenda, and I apologize. I have the original agenda in front of me, but now I have the amended agenda in front of me. Come on, team, you guys need to call me out if I make a mistake.
Right.
I can't because I make enough of them, so I'm not going to be the one to correct her to
All right, let's not keep Sheriff Conrad waiting. Shall we jump to Sheriff Conrad now?
Hi there, thank you. Yeah, appreciate that. I am on duty, so let me first give that disclaimer that I may be called off. I'm beholden to the radio at this point. I don't know how much of a presentation I have, but I do need to put something on your radar as far as fire enforcement issues that have been gaining some steam here as of lately in the last few years. So as I see it, there's two major issues. The first being the increased prevalence in what we call propane fire pits, essentially a gas-fueled open flame. There's a number of different styles, but they're essentially a campfire that's not fueled by wood, it's fueled by fire. And obviously I can see why many folks would feel those are a much safer apparatus. They are UAL approved. They do not throw sparks. They can be turned off with the valve. And I get all that. That all makes perfect sense. It is actually a much safer utensil than having wood fires. The problem with them is that well, first of all, I have seen some kids with sticks cooking their s'mores like the wood's on fire. I've seen a drunken person catch their robe on fire and stick it to their jeans. That's all kind of rare and sideline concerns. The biggest concern is that those propane fire pits, whether from the camp right next door or from a mile away, they appear as a campfire. And so they act as a sign telling folks that campfires are appropriate. And in these dangerous times, that's just not something we can afford. I've spoken with the USFS Ranger and law enforcement. I'm sorry, my radio's going off, making sure they're not calling me. I spoke with the law enforcement officer for the USFS that very occasionally patrols South Mineral. He's having the same issue. He has 3 million square miles in his area, and he gets called out in the middle of the night to go put out campfires. And sometimes they're a real campfire, sometimes they're a propane fire. What I think is important to realize is that when we're trying to enforce these things, we don't want to get caught all over the county because people are really concerned right now about fires. We're in very dangerous times and they're nervous, so they call in any fire they see. So we're getting called out constantly to propane fires, but also a percentage, like maybe 20% of the fires we get called out for, and we get called out every single night, are actual real wooden fires. And the people who have those real wood fuel fires, the very dangerous right now fires, are telling us that, yeah, even though we saw the signs on the highway, there's 8-foot tall, 10-foot wide electronic signboards, there's big yellow signs on your way into South Mineral, there's a sign at the edge of town. Even though they see the signs, they're seeing other people having campfires and thinking that it's okay to have their own. So this is making things really, really difficult. And really, we just started seeing those a few years ago. And over the last 3 years, they've grown so exponentially. I mean, every RV has one. Every, a third of all the camps have them. So they've just really, really exploded in popularity, and they're creating a very dangerous enforcement issue for us right now. So my suggestion on this front is that anytime we feel it necessary to ban a campfire, that we also need to be very clear and specific about our wording, that we also include an open flame. A campfire is a campfire, whether it's fueled by wood or fueled by propane. When open flame campfires are banned, those need to be considered and clearly communicated to the public as well. So that's one issue. The second issue is way more complicated. And I don't know how far we can get with it tonight as a town board because it involves many entities. And that being just that there are so many different players involved, that there are USFS lands, BLM lands, USFS campgrounds, BLM developed campgrounds, private land, town of Silverton owned property, private property, developed RV parks within the town of Silverton. So we have so many players here that have different rules that in itself makes it really, really difficult to enforce. When we have someone driving up from Arizona and getting here at night and getting ready to go to their camp out on County Road 22, and the first thing they drive past is a campfire in Red Mountain Lodge or somewhere else, then they think it's okay. Whether they see the signs or not, they think it's okay. So again, I realize this is a huge issue as far as getting all those players at the table, and I'm not sure what we're going to be able to accomplish now tonight with this town board, but I wanted to make sure it's on your radar and inform you that I have had this conversation with the county. We've changed our resolution. I'm having this conversation tomorrow morning with the fire experts from both the BLM and the U.S. Forest Service. And I know that there are already concerns amongst those organizations about the growing prevalence of these propane open fire pits. So I'm just going to raise the conversation tomorrow morning with those guys about trying to have consistent messaging that is decipherable for the public and enforceable for the folks on the ground who are trying to enforce it. Yeah, I think that about covers my concern over these two issues. And I'll add that you probably have heard there's been a lot of confusion this year, and I apologize for that and take my share of that blame. We've had a lot of confusing information out there, and our office has essentially been over enforcing because of my misunderstanding of what was agreed to in the meeting I was at and then what was actually put in black and white. So we've had some frustrations and some ruffled feathers this year in fire enforcement as well. And I do want to step up and apologize and take my share of that blame. But also keep in mind the goals that we're in a very, very dangerous year this year. And it's not going away anytime soon. Right now, we've got a little bit of rain, and that makes everybody think they can have a campfire because they think that makes everything go away. It's going to take a solid week of campfire or of drizzling rain before we can even schedule an appointment to talk about lessening these restrictions. So it's a tough battle. It's a daily battle. Again, every night we're out putting out campfires. And so I just would like you guys to have a little bit of sight on this, of our vision from the folks on the ground trying to enforce this and how difficult it is and how confused and convoluted it is this year. And see if we can, again, talk about having a campfire is a campfire, whether it's wood fueled or propane fueled. And B, I'm really trying to get all the players on the same page so that the whole region has the same rules, the same messaging, and we can clearly communicate to the public and clearly enforce what's out there.
Thank you, Sheriff Conrad. I think there will be a couple of questions if you do still have time. Trustee Barella has her hand up.
So Bruce, have you actually read the secondary fire ban restriction that came out in a separate email to us? And it actually does say building, maintaining, attending an open flame. So is that along the lines that you were thinking of? Is that the proper verbiage that we're kind of looking for?
Yeah, I don't mind that. I think that does leave some deciphering, or somebody
Well,
can say.
It goes on to state it down below, but that's why I was asking if you'd read that secondary restriction that came out that John.
Yeah, forgive me, that there's so much material out there now that I'm really feeling the county did change the resolution. I think the resolution is fine. I don't know if that's going to be the one that holds up here into the future, as again, we need to bring all the players to the table. And I'm not sure if I'll have any success there. I'll know tomorrow afternoon, I hope, if I've had any success in trying to get our federal partners to all become on the same page. I think that's a bigger task than I think it might be, but I have to give it a shot just for the safety of our community here and the safety of our finances here right now too. That's something I failed to mention earlier, that this is a year where we're already behind the gun. We're already really hurting financially, and a lot of businesses are kind of teetering on the edge here. If we were to have a big campfire in our area, we know what that does to us. It's going to drastically affect many, many, many lives. So that is the goal here. And yeah, to your point, I think that it's difficult to answer that. I think that the wording has definitely improved and has included things that I wish to be able to enforce. However, I'm not sure that the wording is clear and concise enough. I think someone could read that as saying an open fire being an open campfire, and not, because it has a valve on it, because it's UAL listed, because it doesn't throw sparks, this is not an open flame in their mind. So I do think that in the long run, we're going to have to clearly identify those open pit propane devices. And then I'm not sure that we can agree on all this wording until we try and get all the players at the table together and have a consistent wording amongst us all.
So I can read it to you. It says maintaining, building,
I have it.
maintaining, and intending. Okay, including
Yeah.
campfire, stove,
Mhm.
charcoal grill, barbecue, coal, wood burning, and other devices, stoves, grills, lanterns, using liquid fuel such as light gas or kerosene, except devices, stoves, grills, or lanterns, using pressurized canisters. So you want that to basically have the wording that says to include propane. Is that correct?
So I don't think it's appropriate right now to get caught up on the particulars of this wording. I think that this wording is okay, but again, if we have any success in getting all the partners together to have a clear and concise message, we're going to have to all agree on the wording together. So it doesn't make a whole lot of sense for me right now to hash out each little particular detail of the wording of this until we can see if our federal partners are going to hear these concerns and try and play ball as well. And then we're going to need to have a meeting where we all come together with the same wording is my take on it.
Thank you.
So
Mayor Pro
Trustee-
Tem Barney had her hand up.
That's it. Was that Mr. Ryder? Were you saying something?
I was just gonna, clarify that the goal tonight of the town ordinance is to more or less, in all material ways, mirror what the county has just passed. So at least our two entities, as of right now, are married on the, the wording and strength of this ban and what this ordinance means. So to Sheriff Conrad's point, we did not try, or we're not proposing to the board to deviate too far from what the county just did, so that at least we can stay in lockstep and eliminate some confusion.
Okay, great. That refers to the question that I had, is sort of what is our job as a board this evening, whether it's to clarify the language or support the enforcement or align with the county. So are we trying to do all three?
All three, and to date, the town has not initiated any kind of fire ban. We've been operating under our normal ordinance. So this is introducing stricter fire ban restrictions that in fact will mirror what the county has just done as well. The county had established a stage 1 fire ban. This is taking the base stage 1 fire ban and creating some further restriction before we would get to a stage 2 as an interim step to try to address the growing risk.
That's a good point, Mr. Reed. First of all, that things may be headed, if we don't get better weather in the forecast here soon, we may be headed towards stage 2, which will essentially make all these points moot. But I think it's important for the future to talk about this consistent messaging. I probably didn't articulate well my concern here about the particular wording. I do think it probably is your goal tonight, or my hope for you tonight, to mirror what the county is doing. My concern is that I'm asking you to do this tonight and we get it done, and then next week I ask you to do something else because the federal partners have other ideas as well. So I'm just trying to give you that heads up and be cautious about, all these different players at the table here are going to have different ideas, and I really appreciate that you guys are moving forward and trying to keep this consistent and mirroring what the county is doing. I just don't want you to be alarmed when next week I might say, can we tweak it a little bit more and do this so that we're all on the same page?
So Sheriff Conrad, thank you very much for setting that expectation. I think that's incredibly helpful. One question I have is, are the stages 1, 2, and 3 fire restrictions it seems like something that should be well documented in terms of the verbiage and wordsmithing by some federal or state agency. Is there something maybe more clear? Because I've read this a bunch of times and I'm still a little confused about the nuances in it. And so for the sake of consistency and clarity, is there some larger state body besides what the county drafted that we could look to potentially adopt?
Yeah, stage 1, 2, and 3 are pretty clearly defined, and that's by the state fire protection organization, and they still leave questions. That's part of my concern and part of why I wanted to discuss with these fire folks tomorrow, that there are still, when they throw in the word developed, what does that mean? If you're driving through town and going out to County Road 2 or 22 and there's a fire ring there, is that developed? Or does that mean, the Red Mountain Lodge where there's, obviously spaces set up and there's fire prevention in place and those guys do a great job there of looking after their guests. So there are things, I think, even in that they could use clarification. And that's part of the rub here, is that there's just so much information and none of it's very clear and concise. And I think that potentially the development of this new device that's causing me so much grief right now, and also other enforcement agents on the ground, kind of opens the door to have this conversation and potentially get this all this wording more concise, more clear for the public and those who enforce it to understand.
Thank you. And one quick follow-up to Administrator Ryder or Attorney Kosnick. The county ordinance wasn't included in our packets. Did they actually pass an order, and is there a copy, and is this like word for word what that says minus the red line that Administrator Ryder shared with us?
Yes, there is a signed order that happened on Friday afternoon, Mr. Mayor. We can get you that copy. I would defer to Paul for specifics where we deviated in wording. Certainly the overall intent and content is the same.
So the only deviation between the two was the county used the word charcoal smoker, and we modified that to charcoal grills and barbecues in 2A. And that was really the only material modification between the two.
Thank you. Trustee Barella, do I see you raise your hand?
I was going to say that these are not new. They've all been on record. The state actually has a very clear defined, as Bruce told you, you can go read and review any of that information, and you can sign up to get the county packets. So that way you can see all the documentation that rolls through. We get it through the chamber every time there's a county packet. If you're a member of the chamber, it just gets dispersed to you. So there are ways, I'm sure, that Willie would sign you up for county packets if everybody was interested.
I believe I am on that. Mayor Pro Tem Barney.
Okay, so I guess obviously this is great because we all have a shared vision of not burning our forests down. That seems like something we don't have to debate, which I'm really excited about. And I think that it seems like what we need to just do to support to make that not happen and support Bruce is to create this consistency, because the land, because of the various land holders and stakeholders, and to create clarity. It's a little clarity for users. It's a little concerning, when someone like me or Bruce or any of us sitting here read this and, if we're saying, so does that mean a confusion for me, Bruce brought it up, was a developed recreational site, that I think that language is confusing. So I would say I'm very much in favor of aligning with whatever the state or federal or, language is for that, and making sure that we're consistent with what the county says, but that we don't add to any confusion, because that does seem like where it's going to be really hard for Bruce to do his job effectively. And I'm not exactly sure what the process is on creating that clarity of language, whether it's the adoption of the federal language, whether it's the, what you're saying, Bruce, about meeting with the other entities involved. But I want to make sure that just as a town entity, we're as clear and consistent as possible. However, we need to do that.
Trustee
I
Barella.
appreciate Pro Tem.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Bruce.
I was going to say, I may even advocate or have you guys consider maybe not taking an action on this evening and giving me the time to meet with the feds tomorrow and see where they are on this, and if it's worth trying to schedule a meeting to get us all at the same table and try and develop that better wording and more consistent wording. I don't know. Again, I feel like that there has been great reception so far, but that's kind of down on my level, and the folks who are on the ground enforcing these things. And this is going to have to go up the food chain to people who work behind the desks and make these rules and create that verbiage. And I don't know how receptive they're going to be to it. I think they're kind of proud of it, and this is going to be kind of a blow, is my take on it. So I don't know how it's going to go, but I would be certainly fully understanding if you guys felt it smarter to table this for the evening until we have more information from the feds and see if it's worth trying to schedule a meeting in the meantime to get some clear stuff for you guys to vote on.
Thank you. Trustee Barella?
I think we're sending a mixed message then if we don't go through and adopt this evening. If we need to, we can make an amendment to the ordinance once you actually have the verbiage, and so can the county, because if we're not backing up the county right now and backing you up by not passing this evening, then we're potentially going to have more calls and more outgoes for you, Bruce. I think we'd be kind of doing the wrong thing by not doing this, but I'm very open to the next meeting having a whatever you want to call it, a rewording if needed. So I'd like to make a motion to adopt ordinance 2020-05, an emergency ordinance establishing a stage 1 municipal fire ban.
Trustee Barella, I see that we have Clark Damron from the fire department also participating tonight. And they asked if there would be an opportunity for them to also express their views and concerns. Would that be okay before it goes to vote?
That's fine. There's just a motion on the floor. Discussion can continue.
Thank you.
Mr. Demron, would you like to weigh in?
Sure. First time using Zoom, so hopefully it's working right. Generally, our position on the ordinance that you have written up here is we think it's prudent and reasonable to do what y'all are doing now, discuss some of these particulars. So whatever y'all come up with, we're planning on supporting and all that. Although I will commiserate with Bruce and all of the wordings type things that y'all are going through right now. So that's up to you guys how to work that out. Just our position on when we're looking at something like this, our perspective is we draw a great distinction between town and then the rest of the county, mainly because of our hydrant system. So it's an excellent system. Anything in town we're very comfortable with. So if there were, say, these propane, however you want to call them, fire pits or whatever. As far as our response to that kind of a thing, we're pretty confident in that we have the mechanisms to that. As soon as you cross that city limits, it's a totally different thing because we don't have the infrastructure for that type of thing. We totally agree with Bruce on and the county on their concerns with that. So just for your information, we wanted to make sure that yeah, the kind of the wording is however it is. Whatever you guys decide, we'll go with it. But just for your information, that inside the town limits, we think is vastly different than, say, the Forest Service county lands. So our response would be much different in either case. So, but we do support whatever y'all come up with. We know it's a hard job.
Thank you very much. Mayor Pro Tem Barney and then Trustee Lashley.
Okay, so I guess I really want to support the idea of enforceable fire restrictions within city limits. And I want to acknowledge that there's some confusion around the semantics that I don't think is the job of the trustees to wordsmith that, but I think it's important that we put out a clear, enforceable message. And I think a couple notes on looking at that, in thinking about kind of what Mr. Dameron was referring to, the private land in town. You know, we have homeowners who have backyards, and we have campgrounds in town, and we also have businesses in town. I think there's some potential confusion there, and I don't know if this is nitpicky or not, but the one about smoking seems a little odd or also confusing. It doesn't seem, it refers to a 3-foot diameter that is barren or cleared of all flammable vegetation. I just think, again, that's a little confusing and also seems, I mean, 3 feet, I don't know if that works or how we make that work. I don't know that that's our job, and I'm happy to support an ordinance that is strong on keeping us safe from burning the forest down. But I also think that this one may be a little unclear and hard to enforce.
Thank you. Trustee Lashley, do you have a comment too?
Do one on 10 4 10 7 in the meeting. Thank you.
I was gonna second Trustee Barella's motion on the floor here. And then I just kind of also wanted to throw in there that I think this is a really challenging time for our law enforcement agencies and emergency services, and anything we can do to support their job, making it more clear, decisive, giving better direction to the public and our emergency services. I think we should do it.
Thank you. I do have one more kind of clarifying question. I saw in a Facebook feed relating to the county's ordinance about closed versus open grills and barbecues that use charcoal. And I'm thinking practically about the campgrounds in town or RV parks in town where perhaps the only cooking device someone's brought with them was a charcoal barbecue. Are we saying that that's not allowed now, or can we provide some clarification there so that people know what to do? Because I think the issue isn't so much whether or not people intend to comply, but perhaps instances where people are attempting to but are uncertain what they're supposed to comply with. And I'd like to direct that question either to Administrator Ryder or Sheriff Conrad before we go to further discussion. Trustee Burrell, I see your hand.
Sure. Sorry. Mayor, that is a confusing one, and I think that's one of the ones that throws in the word developed there, and I'm sorry I don't have that in front of me right now. But we are okay with the fully enclosed charcoal pit here in town. I do think that's problematic out in the county. So again, that just is one of the things that adds more confusion. If it's okay here and you walk across the street and it's not okay there. Coals are very dangerous. I'd love to see in times like this where there are no charcoals, because they often get left unattended. You cook your meal, you all go inside and eat your meal and leave those coals out there, and maybe overnight and forget about them. So people don't tend to water them down like they do a campfire, hopefully. And I do think that coals are dangerous, and I would like to see them eliminated when we're in such dangerous conditions. I do, however, understand that a lot of people only bring that for their cooking utensil, and if they're in a well-developed incorporated town of Silverton area, I think it's perfectly appropriate, where again our fire has more ability to put those out. Typically the developed RV parks have more capability on hand right there as well. So we have been pretty lax on those. I think out in the backcountry they're more of an issue. And also to address Mayor Pro Tem's concerns regarding the smoking, I think that is really confusing wording, and I'm comfortable with the way it is right now. We were during the 416 fire in stage 2, where we didn't allow smoking outside at all. And boy, you want to talk about some enforcement issues. Tell a smoker they can't smoke. So there's someone who just rode in here on a motorcycle and doesn't have an enclosed car or trailer or something to go to. So the way it is right now, we are pretty lax on that, unless we see someone smoking at the gas station, which you'd be amazed how much we see that, or smoking somewhere just really silly. We will stop and talk with someone, but we haven't really stopped visitors from smoking in the normal areas around town, on the sidewalks and whatnot, where it's not so dangerous. But should we go to a stage 2, we're going to be back in those shoes where we are just shutting down everyone smoking cigarettes. Cigarettes are one of the leading causes of forest fires, and it's typically folks throwing them out unextinguished, whether from a car, is a really big deal, because they get a little bit of oxygen as they travel and then hit the ground, or even around town. And I make people pick them up all the time. So I think just to try and clarify for you, Ms. Barney, I think that I'm comfortable with the way that is right now. And I think that if we go to stage 2, it steps up to a more clear and more enforceable restriction.
Great. Thank you, Sheriff Conrad.
Trustee Barella?
So once again, I want to go back because it was brought up about charcoal grills. It actually says, building, maintaining an open flame, including a campfire, stove fire, charcoal grill, and barbecue. Coal, wood, burning stoves and devices, stoves, grills, and lanterns, using such fuel as white gas or kerosene, except for stoves and grills and lanterns, using pressurized gas canisters. So we're saying that charcoal is not the proper way to go. We're saying if you've got a barbecue grill in your backyard or in the developed campgrounds, it appears that it is okay to use them with propane. So is everybody clear on what that actually says in that?
That isn't clear. It's the developed recreation area only applies to smoking, not to grilling. And I specifically saw the conflict with that in a Facebook feed where the sheriff weighed in and said it was permitted. And that's why I wanted to ask, because I think this is different than what the county did in that respect. Trustee Wiegert.
Thank you, Mayor Furman. I'd like to call the vote. We have a motion and a second on the floor. I call the vote.
Is everyone ready to vote without any direction to staff as to what this board would like? Is any further clarification needed, or are we good to go? All right. Staff, would you like any further clarification?
We're good. I would like clarity. Who seconded? Was that Trustee Lashley? Okay, thank you.
Nathan, roll call, please.
Trustee Barella,
Yes.
Trustee Harper,
Yes.
Trustee Weger,
Yes.
Trustee Bierma,
Yes.
Trustee Lashley,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Barney,
Yes.
Mayor Furman.
I support passing an ordinance tonight, but I think this one needs some wordsmithing, so no. Ordinance passes. Moving along to staff reports. Sheriff Conrad, thank you so much for the conversation. And thank you also, Mr. Dameron.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for supporting our enforcement efforts.
All right. For the staff reports, I'm just highlighting the ones that have immediate trustee consideration notes, which include the administrator's reports, Lisa Banner's community relation reports, and Bill McDougall's building fire inspection code officer reports. Administrator Ryder, would you like to walk us through the staff report notes that require attention?
Sure, I'm looking at reminding myself of Mr. McDougall's. I think these are all on the agenda or have already been considered by the board, so I don't have anything to add to anything other than what was written in the staff reports. Obviously, the street vacation is on the agenda tonight, and Hard Rockers has been approved, and mask ordinances. Mr. McDougall is asking for a letter of resolution of support for the county health order. We already have a advisory in place to strongly advise the wearing of masks. I guess the board could consider or direct staff to write a resolution for a letter of support to the county. I don't think that Attorney Kosnick and I think that accomplishes much. We've already made a statement through our emergency ordinance that masks are strongly advised to be worn. and the reasons why. Otherwise, I would entertain any questions on specifics in the staff reports. And also ask that, did everybody get the public works staff report that came in this morning?
Yes, we did.
It will be
Trustee
in-
Lashley.
Thank you, Mayor Furman. I just had questions regarding our finance committee meeting and an update on the finances from Administrator Ryder, just kind of a recap of what we had discussed in the meeting, and just kind of how we're looking as far as sales tax and some of our other numbers. I know Lisa Branner said that we've had about $15,000 worth of cancellations for wedding things. I know that Mollis was looking good, but I kind of wanted to defer to Mr. Ryder's talk on that.
I'm
Sure,
so glad you asked, because as soon as staff reports concludes, the committee reports section, the number one item and only item I'm aware of is the finance committee report. So if we're done,
I was
with
just going to say, if it
staff report,
pleases,
yes, sorry, go ahead.
yeah, I was going to say, if it pleases Trustee Lashley, we'll discuss those. I plan to discuss those under the committee reports.
Yeah, sure, no worries. Well, let's do it after the staff reports then. Sorry to jump the gun there.
I actually think you're good, unless there's any other discussion or questions on staff reports. Awesome. Administrator Ryder, take it away.
Okay, included in your package on page 20 is the snapshot. The Finance Committee met. We discussed details. I guess I would categorize the overall situation as of today is still pretty tough, but less dire than had been previously projected. Sales tax through the first 5 months, almost to $1 met our budget, and our budget was fairly reflective of 2019 that we know was a strong year. So we were pleasantly surprised. June has come in. Our June collections have come in. The snapshot page here is only through May 31st. We're preparing to the end of June 30th as we speak. But June numbers reflect significantly down from the last 2 years in particular, 40% down. However, they did exceed our conservative projection. I had projected $25,000 of collections in June. We're looking at 33 or 34. So while we're still down, we are starting to climb out of my original conservative / dire projection on sales tax. Now, town is busy. Certain businesses are reporting good numbers, but they're qualifying it as saying, well, good means better than we expected, not necessarily good to prior years. You know, let's keep in mind that no matter how busy town is, restaurants are still only able to open or operate at 50% capacity. So they have an automatic governor on them just through the COVID related restrictions. So busy is not necessarily equating dollar for dollar to good sales tax. You know, retailers, they also are distancing, so that's slowing things down. It's just hard to tell right now what the busyness means. Backcountry's full, town is full. Each weekend, it seems like Saturday, Sunday, I drive up and down. Parking on Blair and Green is generally full. So that's encouraging. And we've adjusted, you know, our sales tax projections slightly upwards. We continue to look for ways to cut. Our, you know, mandate has been to cut 10% out of this budget. I've highlighted on page 20, you know, we're at 90.79. Mollis is strong. Director Bove is reporting full campsites and better than average occupancy as related to the last few years for the month of June. There are cancellations, but those cancellations are being backfilled fairly rapidly. So we don't think net there's a significant, as significant of a loss as we might have anticipated. As we look at special events, we're taking a hit. So we budgeted, and Lisa Branner, please jump in if my numbers don't support. We had budgeted something in the neighborhood of $30,000 for special events for the year. We had already booked 29,000 early in the season before COVID really manifested. The cancellations right now are taking that revenue projection, to around $15,000 or $16,000 perhaps for the year is our best guess at this point. But in our projection, you'll see in the snapshot, you need to add up a couple of categories, but anything related to facility rentals, I keep saying special events, I really mean as related to facility rentals. We had lowered that number early on to 50%. So we are projecting at that number. So from original budget to now, we're anticipating about 50% of the revenue that has been baked into our projection. So does that make sense?
Can I clarify one point? On the facility rental budgeted piece, it was $18,000. So we
Sorry, I got
blew our
you.
budgeted amount out of the water. And the reason why it's confusing is because we have facility rentals, we have special event revenue, which is oftentimes sponsorships for Summer Sounds, for example, or our concession sales at Summer Sounds. So when you split those two things apart, the facility rental piece was $18,000 that we budgeted. And we actually far exceeded our budgeted amount in bookings. And now we're just slightly below what we actually budgeted because of cancellations.
Thank you for that. I guess I was confusing the $30,000 special event category with Lisa Branner is correct. 18,000 was originally budgeted for facility rentals. We were, as she said, we were far exceeding that. And even with cancellations, we're getting close to that. So it's not as grim of a picture as we might have thought. Thank you, Lisa, for that clarification. Now we'll start to know more as in, June collections were for April business and town was shut down. I mean, literally shut down. No one in, no one out. Very few physical businesses in town were operating at any capacity, save for the gas station, grocery store, hardware store, etc. I plan to meet with Administrator Tookie to find out if we can get a breakdown of what internet sales were driving. The sales tax collections in June equated to about $650,000 of gross revenue receipts in town in the month of April. And I'd like to analyze further what was driving those gross sales, because with it literally a town closed down, it exceeded my expectations. And would like to know why, and if that is internet sales, which would make sense to be a larger component of things, we're going to find that out. We are running our model right now. I think the biggest toggle point here is that we're not anticipating the train to be able to run until September at the earliest, and have factored that in as well. And so with that, we're still looking at a $375,000 give or take deficit to our original budget. We are developing ideas to deal with that if necessary toward the end of this year. Two things being considered are borrowing just from funds that have cash balances and excess reserve, MOLIS being one and the Conservation Trust being one. This is an allowable through board approval action that is done quite often in municipalities when the general fund comes short. We're going to try everything to avoid it and continue to hope and support local business the best we can to keep sales taxes as robust as they possibly can be. And robust is said, relative to the situation we're in. There is some other items, and board, I will put it out there. If for any reason the town has to issue but seek any kind of debt financing, is going to require a general election vote, almost certainly in November. We have a July 24th deadline to register the fact that we would like to have a general election vote with the county. So I would seek guidance or authorization to file the necessary paperwork to keep our option open to have a general election, possibly for debt issuance of some sort in November, and ask the board's commentary and input on that. I think at this point, it's namely an administrative action to keep the option open.
Trustee Bella?
So are we still potentially looking at the visitor center and using that property?
That's one idea. You know, there is an option available that the visitor center has some value. I've talked briefly with Administrator Tookie about the idea, and he's certainly willing to discuss where we would sell an interest of the village center or the visitor center to the county and lease that interest back from them with a buyback provision to get us through a low point if necessary. That would be a last option, but it is one, you know, being discussed that we could do locally and not involve a third-party institution, et cetera.
So I understand that the town has made some, you know, fairly aggressive budget cuts. Can you walk through some of the things that you've done to reduce our expenses and roughly estimate how much that brought down our budget in terms of the shortfall we're anticipating and the original anticipated budget?
Sure. Well, right. We set a target of 10%, not including compensation. We're meeting that 10% right now. No singular category. We challenged staff early on in this crisis to eliminate all discretionary budgetary items. You know, one that sticks out is $30,000 was budgeted for the 4th of July. That is no longer in this budget, so that was one of the larger cuts. We're watching everything. You know, office supplies, utilities. We shut the visitor center down for a period of time when it was not operating, saving on utilities there. We've set town hall thermostats lower. All of those little things. I can't point, other than maybe the 4th of July, to any singular cut that was as significant as that. It is basically every department, every line item, eliminate discretionary, cut back where you can. Another big one, you know, we shut Kendall down. So that saved a lot of cost in utility, running the lift, staffing. They were cut loose early, the lift operators and so forth. We also do continue to look at staffing. In public works, for example, we had a tenured employee retire. That position was not replaced. We had a less of a tenured employee leave to go work in Montrose. He was replaced by a brand new employee at a lower cost. So, Mr. Mayor, you know, it is a constant daily look at everything we spend. We're not only not spending certain things, we're deferring certain costs. We've cut back on marketing. We've cut back on maintenance in a less material way. I am not a fan of, until completely necessary, to cut back on any kind of key maintenance, because that's just going to create a problem later. So those kind of things, but it's a constant look at every invoice. Every department head looks at every cost. They are daily pinging me about should we spend it or should we not, and we have to make those strategic decisions every day with the goal of maintaining at least a 10% reduction in expenses.
Thank you very much. We know how hard you guys are working, and we all really appreciate it. And I think that was probably pretty helpful for the public that may not have the same insight that we get.
Thank you.
I know that now is not the time to be talking about cutting any type of emergency services, but in terms of transparency, have you received the Q1 budgets from each of the things that we fund, like the county sheriff, fire, ambulance, search and rescue, and things like that, to see if their budgets are tracking expected, over, under, things like that?
I've not requested. What I'd like to do is begin to either line them up at one meeting. Most of those entities you speak of are required per contract to do a quarterly report to the board. We've gotten away from that. So what I'd like to do is either schedule a couple at a time over the next few meetings to come in and report on their operations, including financial performance, if that pleases the board. And then try to get us into a routine where they are reporting quarterly as required.
Trustee Wiegand.
Thank you. This is in reference to Mr. Ryder's question to the board about whether or not to keep the option open for a potential debt issuance during the next upcoming election in November. I think that's a great idea, actually, to have these kind of doors open for us. If we don't need them down the road, then that's okay. But if we do and we don't have the opportunity, we're going to wish we did. So I think this is forward thinking on Mr. Ryder's part, and I think that's a great idea.
Thank you. Administrator Ryder, do you need a formal vote on support of that, or just a general kind of consensus that you're authorized to go ahead and file that paperwork?
I think we're fine with that. I might just defer to Attorney Kosnick to make sure that's an okay approach.
And do we have to specify anything in the paperwork in terms of size or type of debt instrument the town would seek?
Paul, are you available?
Was that question meant for me or Administrator Ryder?
Yeah, no,
so,
for
yeah.
you, Paul, they're asking if there needs to be an official vote for approval to register with the county on July 24th, that we may put a debt issuance issue on the ballot in November.
Administrator Ryder, are you able to sign those applications and stuff yourself on behalf of the town? Do you know that, or is that something that the mayor would sign?
I would have to confirm that. I'm thinking it might be the town clerk, but I will
Okay.
have to confirm.
If that's the case, the direction's fine for Mr. Ryder to fill out the documents and have either himself or the clerk sign. So no formal vote would be needed.
Thank you. One other question is, does the county potentially have sufficient capital to cover our shortfall in some form, whether it be a loan or a shift in this year's town-county agreement?
That is going to be the key discussion with Administrator Tukey. You know, obviously their financial situation also is very fluid, and we need to dig into those details. And what might be available today, and who knows, the next 2 months may not be available tomorrow, depending on how COVID continues to impact us financially, both town and county.
Thank you. So we have a general direction to move ahead with the town filing paperwork to keep the door open for potentially taking debt in connection with November ballot. I believe you asked for one other form of support or direction. Oh, it was to get the to get all of the different
to start
organizations
scheduling,
together.
yeah, an initial round to get caught up, and then to start having fire, EMS, et cetera, police report on the quarterly basis.
Great. Does anyone else have any finance committee related questions? Trustee Lashley, did that cover the basis for you?
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Administrator Ryder.
All right. Any other committee reports? Mayor Pro Tem Barney.
I had a Kendall committee meeting, and there's really not much to report other than we've had some very productive and informative conversations with leaders from other ski towns. So municipal leaders speaking with our committee, members, just to kind of share some of their successes and struggles and things they did right and things they kind of missed the mark on, to just collect some more information about that.
Thank you. Trustee Brella.
This is for Mayor Pro Tem Barney. Have you ever signed up for the CAS emails that come out directly from Margaret Bowes?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great, I'd get those.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
The Master Plan Committee had its initial meeting, which was just to discuss the timing and method of finding the next 2 members from the community. And we published an article in this week's or last week's newspaper, the Silverton Standard, with the details for submission, and the town will be posting on its Facebook page. And Lisa, you can confirm, but possibly also the website, about the 2 open positions and how to apply. And for anyone listening, we're seeking 2 additional members for the Master Plan Committee that's going to support Planner Adair in making revisions to the master plan, which then reports up to the Planning Commission, which then reports up to this board. And those applications will be due July 23rd. Unless there's any other committee reports, we'll now move on to trustee reports. Does anyone have anything to update this board on? I just have 2 quickly. I had a conversation with Parker Newby, and I know that I mentioned to some of you that that was scheduled. Parker Newby is the representative of the Bonita Peak Citizens Advisory Group, and he provided a general overview of what that group's been doing and what their status is, and followed up with an email to the trustees summarizing the same. And if any members of the public would like that, it seemed like it was a pretty good summary of what they're doing and kind of the immediate action items that are coming up and how they're working with the EPA. Trustee Barella? You're muted.
Spacebar. I figured out what I always do. I hit the spacebar. So I do believe that if he's going to continue to just do this in this fashion, then we need to make it a part of the packet, because that's information that everybody needs to see. It's so relevant to what goes on here every day in reference to the EPA in the town and how long they'll be here. So those are big, big items. And if we're not going to get a presentation from him via either Zoom or live for our constituents in the town to see, then we should include those in the next packet.
Yep, I believe he's very open to a presentation. It didn't end up on this agenda. With the my other update was that we had a trustee retreat of sorts with Patrick Rondinelli from DOLA, where we aimed at trying to get these meetings down to 2 hours if possible. So the update from Parker Newby or presentation, we would like to schedule for a town meeting in the relative near future, but this one looked like it might be long with some of the agenda items upcoming. So we didn't put it on this one, but Trustee Barella, it's a great suggestion. I think we should either include his update in this next meeting packet or even ask if he's available to provide a live update at the next meeting.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Any other trustee reports? Okay. So with that, we move on to continued business, which is the first reading of ordinance 2020-01, vacating certain streets and alleys south of County Road 2 and adjacent to the eastern municipal town boundary. And I would request that we kick this off by Administrator Ryder or Attorney Kosnick giving a quick explanation of this process, since we do have a number of new committee members with respect to first reading, second reading, and I believe there's also a public hearing involved. So if you guys could explain how that works for everyone, that would be fantastic.
I'll go ahead, Administrator Ryder, if that's okay.
Yes, sir.
So as far as the process goes, today you'll have the consideration of the first reading of the ordinance. There doesn't necessarily need to be public comment or hearing as part of the first reading. Modifications can be proposed during the first reading. Depending on how complex the modifications are, determines on whether that first reading actually has to come back again for a first reading or whether it just moves on to a second reading. At the second reading, the ordinance would require a public hearing where members of the public have the right to comment during that hearing. And if it's passed there, it would be published in the newspaper and then would become effective, I believe it's the 30th day after the publication. So that would be the procedure for adopting the ordinance.
Thank you very much. Is everybody pretty clear on that process? Great. All right. So do we start with the reading or do we start with discussion?
I believe we have traditionally started with the actual reading.
And is that something you would like to do or Nathan should do? All right. Here we go. Ordinance number 2020-01. An ordinance vacating certain streets and alleys south of County Road 2 and north of Campground Road. Whereas the town of Silverton, Colorado, defined as the town, is a statutory town under the laws of the state of Colorado. Whereas since approximately 1971, the town has leased to private landowners certain platted streets and alleys located within an area currently operated as Silverton Lakes RV Resort LLC, defined Silverton Lakes. Whereas the leased platted streets and alleys have never been improved for such purpose, and an area of the leased platted streets and alleys is designated as wetlands by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, defined as the Army Corps. Whereas the Army Corps has alleged that streets and alleys that are leased to Silverton Lakes were distributed in violation of Section 404 of the Clean Water Act. Whereas the town and Silverton Lakes have worked in cooperation to create a mitigation and monitoring plan, defined as the mitigation and monitoring plan, that remedies the alleged violations. Whereas in conjunction with the mitigation and monitoring plan and in an effort to comprehensively address the area leased to Silverton Lakes, the town and Silverton Lakes have discussed amending the existing lease, granting easements to the town and vacating certain streets and alleys. Whereas pursuant to section 16-1-70 of the Silverton Municipal Code, and the vacation of streets and alleys is allowed when, in the opinion of the Board of Trustees of the town of Silverton, defined as the Board of Trustees, it is found and determined that the public use, convenience, and necessity have not for a long time past required and do not now require the use of such portions of said streets and alleys. Whereas Colorado statute allows for the Board of Trustees to vacate streets and alleys located within the municipal limits subject to any provision of the Constitution and the statutes of the state of Colorado. And whereas the Board of Trustees finds and determines that the public use, convenience, and necessity have not for a long time past required and do not now require the use of the streets and alleys identified on Exhibit A and depicted on Exhibit B attached hereto. Now therefore, be it ordained by the Board of Trustees of the town of Silverton, Colorado, Section 1, the Board of Trustees finds and determines that the public use, convenience, and necessity have not for a long time past required and do not now require the use of the streets and alleys identified in Exhibit A and depicted on Exhibit B attached hereto, define the streets and alleys. The Board of Trustees further finds that vacation of the streets and alleys is a reasonable and necessary action in order to cooperatively work with Silverton Lakes in formulating a remedy to the alleged violation of Section 404 of the Clean Water Act. Section 2, the vacation of the streets and alleys shall not leave any land adjoining the streets and alleys without established public road or private access easement connecting said land with another public road. Section 3, the streets and alleys as described on Exhibit A and depicted on Exhibit B attached hereto and incorporated herein are hereby vacated through this ordinance. Section 4, the title to such vacated street shall vest in accordance with the provisions of CRS Section 43-2-302. Section 5, all rights of way or easements heretofore existing or granted by the town of Silverton for electricity, cable, gas, sewer, water, or similar pipelines and appurtenances, and for ditches or canals are hereby reserved and preserved for the continued use of any such rights of way or easements for any and all of said purposes. Section 6, this ordinance shall take effect and be in force on the 30th day after it has been published. And then there's the signature section. Introduced, read, passed, and adopted and ordered published this blank day of July 2020, Town of Silverton, Colorado, attested by Town Clerk. Mayor Pro Tem Barney.
This is just a little nitpicky, but if there's anyone listening who can't read along in just at the beginning, I think that you just misread the word in the 1, 2, 3, fourth whereas down as distributed. It's actually, and it says disturbed.
Disturbed. Yes. Thank you and apologies. So any discussion, comments? I have a few. Mayor Pro Tem Barney.
I guess, okay, before I hop into comments or discussion, again, just sort of a process question here. What we need to do is come to, from what I understand from Mr. Kosnick, come to an agreement on if we were to make major revisions to this, it would require a second first reading. If we make minor revisions, we can sign it tonight. That's a clarifying question.
That's correct. And you wouldn't be signing it tonight. You would just be approving the first reading.
Thank you. Okay. Okay. I guess I have another process question, and this is just, this is a thick packet to get through. As you know, someone who didn't go to law school, there's a lot to try and understand. And so I just want to lead with, I'm seeking understanding without professional training. And I'm also kind of thinking about, if you're a member of the public, this could be a lot to digest and try and understand sort of how we got to this conclusion. I don't know how to address that, but I just want to say that it's a lot and without professional training. And then my other sort of top comment on this particular reading was related to section 1, and hopefully I'm not off base here. I just wondered, it's a little wording thing on section 1, where it says the Board of Trustees finds and determines that the public use, convenience, and necessity have not for a long time, blah, it goes on forever. I wondered if we could flip that wording to indicate that it was, we are not vacating streets and alleys as kind of our first, to me, it reads like it's sort of our first go at this. And I wondered if we could find some way of saying, as a result of this violation of the Clean Water, we have landed on this decision to vacate those streets and alleys. Mr. Kosnick or Mayor Furman probably has a better legal, I don't know, can advise there legally.
So
I can't advise.
If I may,
just put that out there.
So
Attorney Kosnick,
if I may
please go
try
ahead.
to answer, yeah, if I may try to answer it. So I think, you make some good points there. And I think, we try to sum a lot of that up in the whereas statements, more of why we're doing, or why what's being proposed is being proposed this way. That sentence that you were reading was kind of expressly out of the code, and it's something that's required in there, at least the first half of it is. So to the extent, you want to qualify that, we can do that, but some of that wording has to be in there. And I would just suggest that if we want to add more of the story kind of portion of it, and it's probably more appropriate in the whereas statement. So if there's something that you want to add in there, that would probably be the place to do it.
Okay, thank you.
Trustee Wiegert.
First off, I just want to thank the staff for their diligence and resilience and stick-to-itiveness to get the job done. I feel like this is pretty much what we asked from them in the last meeting that we had about this. So I'm not really surprised to see that we're going to end up paying $10,000 for those lots. I don't really feel so great about that, but I think that is probably pretty equal to the consulting fee that the Heimbaughs had initially paid. So, you know, I'm not surprised that they're going to make us pay for that.
Where do you see $10,000?
Unless I'm misreading that in the quitclaim deed.
I think that's $10.
$10.
That was in the lease.
In the lease.
Yes, Trustee Wiegert, there is no cost to us for the conveyance of the private land from Silverton Lakes to the town.
Okay, thanks for the clarification. My mistake.
So I don't have any like earth-shattering questions or comments. Nothing to totally derail us or anything like that. So I don't want to scare anyone here. But I did have a couple of things. I think I was kind of following what Mayor Pro Tem Barney was asking for in section 1. I think she meant to reference the second sentence, not the first sentence. And it was just reformulating that to say, in formulating a remedy to the alleged violation of section 404 of the Clean Water Act, the Board of Trustees further finds that, and just flipping the order of that is what I think you meant. The first sentence is just kind of restating, like,
Yeah, sorry, I just
said, one
read
of the
the
whereas
first.
clauses.
Yeah, I read the first sentence to just indicate the paragraph that I was looking at, but my actual revision does live in that second sentence of that paragraph.
I was just trying to make sense of the comment. Hopefully that's what you were working for. Little typo, possibly section 4, should the titles of such vacated street, should street be the defined term streets and alleys? Attorney Koznick.
I think that'd be a good yes, I think that'd be a good clarification.
And then something else that I was wondering about is, does this ordinance stand alone, or should it be contingent on, or at least referencing all of these other documents related to this? So for example, if we get through passing this ordinance, but then something happens in the exclusive wetlands easement agreement, or something happens with the quitclaim deed or the lease, will this ordinance to vacate the streets and alleys still be effective? And is there a way to make it contingent on all of those things actually being completed?
So I believe you bring up a good issue in one that we've thought about. And so if this gets passed tonight, the first reading, it would be the first thing, will be ahead of all the other items on the next agenda. And so you would know ahead of time whether the ordinance has passed. If it does not pass, then I think all the other documents that we would discuss tonight and what would be considered next week, would not be able. You wouldn't be able to really consider those at the time. And to address too the timing issues, something that will need to be added to the other documents that we'll move on to if this passes the first reading tonight, is that they won't become effective till the ordinance becomes effective. So they would be contingent on the ordinance becoming effective 30 days after a second reading. And we'd also strive to have Mr. Heimbaugh sign all the documents prior to the meeting to know that that he was actually going to sign all of these before the board considered them.
Okay, thank you. I think in that case, without making any substantive changes to the ordinance itself, I would find it helpful to add in the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6th whereas clause that refers to these other actions we're taking, to just specifically reference the agreements. So saying, whereas in conjunction with the mitigation and monitoring plan, in an effort to comprehensively address the area leased to Silverton Lakes, the town and Silverton Lakes have discussed amending the existing lease, as more specifically described in, and then reference that document, granting easements to the town as more specifically referenced in, and so that we specifically reference each relevant document, which I think also retroactively, if someone were to try and unpack what this ordinance related to, they would have very specific references to all of these related documents, say 10 years down the line when someone tries to buy the property and a future board is trying to figure out what this all meant. Mayor Pro Tem Barney.
Okay, so had a couple other questions about things that I don't see in the in some of the documents that you're referring to, Mayor Furman. One was who's covering the cost of prior mitigation and any other fees that I may or may not be aware of. And so I'm curious about how we want to make that clear for prior mitigation costs and any prior, I guess, actions that had fees associated. I may not know all of those.
That overlaps a bit with the last comment I had on the ordinance, which was thinking about needing a release related to all of the actions that led up to the Army Corps violation or alleged Army Corps violation. Because I know we have the indemnities in the other documents, but I don't see somewhere where we're released from liability for that particular act. And like Mayor Pro Tem Barney said, all of like fees and expenses in connection to that as well.
Okay, I think that's not a document that has been included, but that could make sense. So that's something that, when we go talk about the other documents after the ordinance, we could talk about adding that document for the next meeting, kind of a global release on both sides.
Trustee
Just
Barella.
to be clear, just to name it. Sorry, Trustee Barella.
Oh, name it in the whereas as well.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Trustee Barella.
What does this do to our tolling agreement?
The tolling agreements with the Army Corps, so it's not really related to nothing that we're talking about right now.
So so none of what we're doing changes it?
Right. I mean, the tolling agreement essentially allowed the Army Corps to still bring, a action against the town and Silverton Lakes in the future if this wasn't resolved. It gave them it extended the statute of limitations period for them.
And so this release we're talking about would include coverage for that potential liability as well.
The release would not be with the Army Corps, though. It would just be with Silverton Lakes once the permit is issued. Okay. So
release and then coupled with all the other indemnities. I guess the idea is that if the Army Corps is not happy with something in the future, it's no longer the town's issue, and Silverton Lakes will cover us. Trustee Barella.
Well, but that's not necessarily the case because we now own the wetlands. So if the Army Corps does have something in the future, it would be directly related to the town of Silverton.
Well, to clarify, something in the future relating back to this incident, something in the future that's new, you're right, would be our issue. Is that right, Attorney Kosnick?
That's correct.
Thanks. Mayor Pro Tem?
Okay, and then something else that I didn't see, and maybe it doesn't belong in this document again, but just the reassessment of the value of the new property that the Heinbaus would come to own as a contiguous piece of land.
That is something that the assessor, once the deeds are issued and the transfer occurs, then the assessor would reassess the property.
Okay, thank you, got it.
Mm-hmm.
So from my perspective, subject to the discussion on all of the related documents, I'm okay with this as drafted and the little clarifications we just talked about.
Me too. Oh no, never mind. Not related to this document, different.
So Attorney Kosnick, are the requests for amendments to the whereas clause that I made, the reference in section 4 to the defined term, and you considering whether from a legal perspective, section 1 needs to be clarified at all, sufficient to allow us to count this as the first reading, or are those too substantive?
Nope, those are not too substantive. This could be the first reading. As far as the section 1 change goes, that I thought we were referring to the first sentence before, but the second sentence we can change around the way that was suggested, and that's no problem.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So if the board is okay with it, it would be a motion to approve the first reading of the ordinance.
Would someone like to make such a motion? Mayor Pro Tem Barney.
I so move.
I can second it.
Roll call, Nathan, please.
Trustee Barella,
Yes.
Trustee Harper,
Yes.
Trustee Weigert,
Yes.
Trustee Bierma,
Yes.
Trustee Lashley,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Barney,
Yes.
Mayor Furman.
Yes. Moving on to discussion of the documents related to this ordinance 2020-01.
Mayor Furman, I'm again going to turn that over to Attorney Kosnick. This is intended to be kind of a brief overview of each document, why it's necessary and content, and then entertain any questions subsequent to his presentation or to his discussion.
Thank you.
I'll go ahead, and so the intent today is really, just to go over these documents, make you familiar with them. They would be considered at the next meeting if the second reading of the ordinance is approved. And they're all obviously related, and they all require or are predicated on the vacation of the streets and alleys north of Campground Road. So the first document is the exclusive wetlands easement, and it's kind of helpful if you look at Mr. Ryder included the map at the end of some of these documents, and so if you refer to that, we're talking about for wetlands easement areas here, we're talking about the two areas above Campground Road. And so once the streets and alleys are vacated, if they are vacated above Campground Road, then Silverton Lakes will own all that land. As part of the mitigation plan with the Army Corps, those two areas identified as WE there have to be preserved. And so the way that that's going to occur is through an easement grant to the town. The the town then will be responsible for, you know, the maintenance and repair and making sure that it's protected. Silverton Lakes will be indemnifying the town for any kind of damage or claims that arise from activities within the easement area. Silverton, it's an exclusive easement, or so that the town has the sole right of use of the area. And those are kind of the highlights. This has gone out, these documents have also gone out to Mr. Heinbaugh and his agents. And one thing that they pointed out here was that the Exhibit B legal description is incorrect. So that would be replaced at the next meeting too. So are there any questions on specifically on the exclusive or Mayor, excuse me, how would you best like to handle this? Would you just like me to present these and move on, or?
I think it's helpful to do them one at a time so we have the context for discussion.
Okay.
Trustee Brella?
What section of the description, Paul? Really quickly, so I can.
The whole Exhibit B is actually incorrect.
Okay.
It's referring to the other yellow area on that map.
Thank you.
I was wondering if Exhibit A should have a similarly specific description as Exhibit B.
So Exhibit A is the description that was used when Silverton Lakes took title to the property. So we know they own that property based on that description. The Exhibit B is just a meets and bounds description that was just created as part of this process by the surveyor for Silverton Lakes. So we don't have a separate meets and bounds description for the overall Silverton Lakes property.
Mayor Pro Tem Barney.
Okay, I had a similar thought about Exhibit A. I guess this is maybe just again, a clarity issue for any citizen, you know, for the public, for the town of Silverton, because Exhibit B is really clear about where the streets and alleys are that we're vacating, but the town of Silverton is acquiring land below that campground road. And so in Exhibit A, in neither of those maps do we really have a clear visual of what the town will acquire.
So when you're referring to Exhibit B, that's the one that I'm looking at for this is the meets and bounds description for the easement area. And the map was provided just solely as a just for the board to be able to have a better idea of where these areas are located. It's not actually a document that would be recorded with this easement.
Okay.
Yeah, these maps, to clarify, just purely for visual reference to make it easier for you as the board to understand which pieces we're talking about. You'll see this map show up later as well when we're talking about the deed restriction document and so forth.
Okay. And then I guess actually to add on to that, I will say that in all of the property descriptions, I didn't check those. I'm assuming that the legal or technical name of all of those boundaries are accurate and true.
So that is something that I wanted many sets of eyes on, and there's been several errors that have been pointed out already. So I think we're in a good place, you know, as far as the accuracy of these descriptions.
Okay, thank you.
So just to be clear, yeah, Attorney Kosnick, myself, and Kyle from Cottonwood have all, we've spent a great deal on line item by line item, word by word, to make sure that these cross-reference correctly to what each document is referring to.
Trustee Bell.
Is this something that we need to have the county just double check? As far as the property and the continuous properties go? for the description because it would be contained in county offices, correct?
Yeah, and so for this document specifically, Exhibit A is just a straight, that was what was on the deed. That was the grant to Silverton Lakes when they took title to the property just a couple years ago. And Exhibit B is the description that was just recently created by the surveyor. So that parcel has never existed. That description has never existed. It was just created by the surveyor. So unless we have another surveyor double check it, I mean, there's no way that I know of confirming every single number in there.
Okay, but it was just a recent survey, so that gives me peace of
Yep.
mind. Yeah, thank you.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Should we go to the next document, Mr. Mayor?
I had a quick question about the Silverton Lakes rights paragraph in 5, or did I just skip a document?
I think you're right.
Currently in the wetlands easement document, Silverton Lake rights. No, you're in the right one, Mr.
So
Mayor.
I was confused by the last sentence. It looks like Silverton Lakes is giving the easement to the town's rights to the easement shall be exclusive. And then in the last sentence, it says, but they can use the property or the easement insofar as it's consistent with and doesn't impair any grants in this agreement. So I was just curious what that, whether that undercut
the purpose,
anything.
Yeah, no, it's a good point, and it appears that it would be in conflict with the rest, but it's kind of necessary to show that it's not. This isn't a grant of fee title here. That they still have some right. This is actually an easement that is being granted and not fee title. So that's why that is in there. But it does. You're correct. Make it appear that they have some conflicting right that with the previous sentence.
Gotcha. And then the other question I had in number 7 in the indemnity, it says who and what and how, but it doesn't say when. Does there need to be anything with respect to timing, whether it happened before the date of this agreement or after, or is it okay as drafted from your perspective?
So as the board mentioned previously, I think, it does sound like it would be a good idea to have a kind of a global release of the any kind of damages or claims relating to, the events that led us here. And so I think that document would address that need.
Got it. My last question is, are there any differences between what's in this agreement and the description of land and what was presented to us in the short memo on July 13th? And I suppose that question applies to each of the documents that we're looking at tonight.
So I'm sorry, which memo are you referring to?
The real quick bullet point memo that's had final draft negotiations with Silverton Lakes RV. I'll volunteer that I'm only aware of one difference, which was the land that's being granted to town. There was like a partial piece of a block that wasn't referred to in that memo, but is being granted to town. But I was just wondering if there's anything else in that memo that is different than what's presented in these documents. Like, has any deal term changed in some way?
No.
Mayor, I'm not aware of any.
I'm the only thing I can think of, Attorney Kosnick, is maybe that little block 17 is now being captured, but it's a little piece. It's a weird piece. It's not part of the original Silverton's Lakes. I'm not sure it's defined at the county, but we deal with it in these documents. So that's a very minor change, but the only one I could think of that was different or added.
All right, I'm good moving on if everyone else is.
Okay, the next document is a restriction on property that the town would own, and that would be the DR, if you look at the map there, the DR parcel that's below Campground Road. And so when if the ordinance is passed and stuff, then the Silverton Lakes would be deeding over the blocks there to the town, and the town would own then the streets, the alleys, and the blocks within the DR area there. And so instead of a conservation easement, the town would own it all. It would have to be restricted through this declaration. And the declaration itself came from the Army Corps, and there's some very minor modifications to it, but not too many. It's a form that they use typically with these types of deals, and one that they want to see. We could vary it, but we'd have to go back to them, and I don't know exactly what their process is. There's nothing that sticks out to me as a huge issue for the town, but be glad to hear if anybody else has any other thoughts on that.
I was just wondering what section 3 means, not an offer to dedicate no right of public use.
That's typically more applicable to, if it's private property, that the easement itself is not offering, or sorry, the restriction itself is not offering up an additional right for the public. And so simply this document is not providing any additional rights for the public that don't already exist.
Any other questions to this document from the board? Cruising right along, quitclaim deed.
Okay, quitclaim deed. This is for those blocks below, the blocks below Campground Road. For block 11, there's a portion there on the southeast kind of quarter there that is used for tent camping for Silverton Lakes. And so that portion would be retained by Silverton Lakes, but the rest of it would be block 17, 10, and 15, all below Campground Road, and the portions of 11 that he would not be retaining.
Mayor Pro Tem Barney.
Okay, so the quitclaim describes the property that the town assumes ownership of, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
All right, moving along to the lease.
Okay, the lease is for the portions of the streets and alleys below Campground Road that still would be utilized by Silverton Lakes in their operations. And so it's a fairly limited amount that's described there on exhibit. Sorry, it's not an exhibit. It's there at the bottom, starting at the bottom, page 1. So that's the area that would be leased to Silverton Lakes for its operations. And I believe there's an additional, we just were made aware that some of the camp sites go in, Mr. Ryder, if you can correct me, here's at 20th.
Yeah, along 20th, just below block 11. Attorney Kosnick, I think there is some spillover there of tent camping.
So that would also additionally be leased. So it'd be a little portion of 20th there, right by block 11. The lease itself is $10 a year. There's an indemnification in here, which, as you recall, was a part that wasn't a part of the previous lease, where the town would be indemnified for actions on the streets and alleys that might be a result of Silverton Lakes actions. Either party can terminate this agreement just by providing 90 days notice to the other party. There's an insurance requirement that Silverton Lakes must carry a certain amount of insurance, a name, the town. So I believe those are the material clauses in here. And again, it's a relatively small area we're talking about this time around.
I only had 2 questions on this one. Mayor Pro Tem has her hand up though, so please.
No, it's all right. Go ahead.
The first was in my notes I had for like negotiable deal terms that we were possibly going to ask for a material amount of rent. Nothing crazy, but I had in my notes, it just said material amount of rent, comma, a few $1,000s question mark. So I don't know if that was ever a discussion or somewhere where the town could potentially include something here to start recouping some of its costs associated with this issue. And the other question I had is in assignment. I know that we have a 90-day termination provision, so nothing else really matters that much. But instead of the ability to assign without prior written consent, to ask for prior written consent not to be unreasonably withheld, conditioned, or delayed. And that's all I have on these.
I guess to answer your first question, Mr. Mayor, no, we've not had any substantive discussion regarding changing the rent amount from, essentially no rent to something more substantial. And, if that was something that the board would like to consider, that's certainly on the table, for a potential negotiation.
Mayor Pro Tem Barney.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Ryder. That was my question, is how did we arrive at $10 a year? I think it was $1 a year. So we've raised it to 10.
It is a 10,000% increase. No, we have not broached that with the Heinbaughs as a negotiating point at this time.
So 10 is meant to just indicate that
there has to be some
we're carrying on with what it was and in the spirit of what it has been.
Paul can expand legally, but there has to be some value assigned to this for it to be valid. And $10 is a standard amount to get you there.
Up from
That's correct.
$1. Sorry, go ahead, Mr. Conley.
There's generally just nominal consideration put in here, and $10 is generally the amount that's put in. I think $1 might have been the amount put in there in the 70s. So anyway, it's just a nominal amount.
What's the kind of thinking between pros and cons from the town's perspective of asking for this to be something that could benefit the town in a more meaningful way than a nominal tip of the hat? And this was addressed to Administrator Ryder.
Well, it's more revenue is the obvious benefit, even if it's a nominal amount. That would be, to me, the only benefit is it's more rental revenue to the town. Does it have, the potential to upset the rest of the deal? Probably not. It would have to be a discussion to start. How would we value the rent? How would we determine a rent? What are our reasons for deviating, from the historical, basically free lease? The amount of property he's renting from us is now significantly reduced from what it was before. The bottom line benefit would be some extra revenue for the town.
Trustee Bell, and then Trustee Lashley.
I'm wondering why we're deviating from what we discussed in executive session and direction we already gave staff.
We're not, in my view. This was in my notes that this was one of the deal points to be discussed. I have
And I've got notes that say that we didn't really come up to anything. We said renegotiate the lease. We did not put any substantive amount set to anything other than to renegotiate the lease.
Right, and so I wouldn't say that this is a deviation in any way because this includes renegotiating the lease. I have term, cost, indemnity, assignment, and insurance. And those are all the things that Attorney Kosmic highlighted. Right, and asking about how we've determined these and whether these are the specific provisions we'd like to agree to are perfectly in line with this discussion. Trustee Lashley and then Mayor Pro Tem Barney.
Thank you, Mayor Furman. Just was curious a little bit about Silverton Lake's capacity, especially on the town leased portion, as far as how many people they're allowed to have capacity or what square footage kind of requirements they have as a campground. I don't know if any of you have been there in the last couple of weeks too, but there has been an incredible amount of cars parked in what is the stage 2 wetlands remediation area. So I was just curious if we have any kind of guidelines for that, or if we should include anything like that in this discussion for lease.
Is the specific question whether or not they're operating in a way that's legal? And does that pertain to this conversation? Is that what the question is?
Specifically, if we should put some kind of capacity limit on the leased portion of this property, or whether they have any kind of guidelines as far as just as a campground, they're allotted a certain amount of square footage per, acre, whatever they have, and whether we need to add additional kind of additional restrictions for that, or if that's kind of already included in their normal regulations.
Trustee Lashley, I'd have to do further research unless Attorney Kosmic. I don't know if there's certainly not in the lease any restriction, either former or current version. Do we have a town ordinance that deals with campground capacity? That I do not know off the top of my head.
Wouldn't something like that be in the business license and something that, Bill McDougall as building inspector and
yeah, that's who I'd have to review that with Bill.
And Trustee Harper, you had your hand up.
I did. I wanted a clarification on Trustee Lashley, so that they were parked in the wetlands.
Sure. If you drive down Campground Road and you see all the OHV trailers and you reference it with our map of their stage 2 remediation plan for wetlands, that's considered OHV and trailer parking basically right now. And I don't know how that pertains to our lease, our current lease, or the future lease that we're discussing.
Sheriff Conrad raised his hand on the Zoom. I imagine he might have a response to that.
I did just want to echo Trustee Lashley's concern there. I have noticed that it seems like the campground is growing further and further south in that area. And I know that my father was a big part of creating that wetlands back in the day, and it was deemed official wetlands by the Army Corps of Engineers at that time. So I'm not going to claim to know any of the specifics about what those boundaries there are and what they are able to use. I think that's probably a question for the Army Corps. But I would agree. I have seen that area kind of continuing to expand, and it's raised a little bit of concern for me. And then a little bit off topic, I have a question that might be addressed a little later on, but there's also other adjacent landowners there, including myself. And I haven't heard any information since your executive session, and wondering what this proposal means for myself and the other adjacent landowners there.
Thank you, Sheriff Conrad.
I think I can at least partially answer that, Sheriff Conrad. For the individual owners, Lot D, or Block D rather, there's no change to your status. The town is retaining its right-of-way under this current scenario that runs adjacent to your property. And the rest of Block D, previous deals had proposed that right of way would be abandoned, in which case half of that right of way abutting your property would have accrued to you in ownership. That's no longer the case. So the short answer is status quo for Block D.
Maybe to provide a little further clarification too, as far as the lease to Silverton Lakes, I believe that the only area that they actually have operation on is that alley in between 16 and the area just adjacent to 11, where there's some tent campsites over there. And that's it. The rest of it's being leased just because it's access, which even if it wasn't leased, they would have, it still would be a public street. So as far as the operations go for RV or tent camping, it would be the alley in 16 and just adjacent to 11 there.
Thank you. So to close the loop on the lease, I had the one, I think, pretty non-controversial request on the assignment clause. And then the discussion around whether or not there should be a nominal rent amount or a meaningful rent amount. And I would leave this to Administrator Ryder to determine, but my view is that this deal is a pretty significant potential windfall to Silverton Lakes RV, and that this is an opportunity for the town to make some additional revenue from property that it's owned and hasn't benefited from, other than providing it for use to a campground for the last 50 years. So if this can help the budget in some way and provide some more stability and fund some more public works and parks and rec, I think it's a good idea to try and get it, but I leave that to town. Mayor Pro Tem Barney.
Okay, so that's why I think this is relevant to our discussion now, because it really is the discussion of how town either benefits or doesn't from the terms of the lease. So
Can I make a quick point before we get too much in? We are leasing to them public right of way. The lease is getting us some indemnity language, some other, provisions that benefit to the town, but otherwise there is access over the public right of way, whether or not there's a lease or not. Does that make sense? We're putting the lease in place to give us basically an indemnity clause. But with no lease, he still has access. So this is where I do have some trouble creating a value of rental stream for something that they can use anyway to access their business without a lease. So I just wanted to make that clear and have you take that under consideration as we kind of discuss this part of it.
Right. I understood from Attorney Cosmic in an earlier discussion that we can't charge anything for the vacation of streets and alleys to a private party, and that's where the real, I think, transfer of value is. And so the thought was, is it possible to put value into this part of the transaction, looking at the thing as a whole? In any event, I think I'm okay with you guys figuring that out and doing what's best for the town. Any other discussion on the lease? All right, Paul.
Okay, the last document is the Campground Road and Trail Easement Agreement. This provides the town with a easement for Campground Road. Currently existing, there's only the utility easement for Campground Road, so this is access and utility easement. The trail easement is what would be referred to kind of as a blanket easement across the portions of property that Silverton Lake would still own there south of Campground Road down by toward the river. And so it's not a specific location for the easement right now, but it's kind of an as-built location. So once the trail is ever built in that area, then a description for the actual location can be recorded, but essentially it gives the town a right to put a trail anywhere down in that area on property that Silverton Lakes owns.
Does this easement currently include the land that Silverton Lakes is planning to sell? And would this agreement apply to the buyer of that land if those deals are completed?
Yes. I believe that would be 6, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah,
And so that would have been 6.
and you know, the part of block 11 that we're not taking at this point, we now have an easement over that portion to put the river trail.
I had 2 potential comments to section 3 of this agreement. In the long first sentence, right before the period, but without interference with the town's use thereof. Since this is intended to be a public trail, should it say the town's and public's use thereof? So that it isn't read perhaps in the future to just be like town vehicles or maintenance or things like that.
That's fine. It could be added, yes.
And then in the next sentence where it says that Silverton Lake shall have the perpetual right to use campground road easement for the use of OHVs, the qualification there, so long as it continues to be used as a campground, I think that should also be qualified to be so long as it's in compliance with the general OHV ordinances and rules in the town. Because otherwise I think it's suggesting that this is going to be treated as private property instead of still property that is an easement for public use. That's it for me.
Okay, if there's no other comments, then we'll make those changes. Like I said, there's going to be a couple other changes that were pointed out, mainly with typos and other things, and then they would be presented to the board at the next meeting.
Great. Any other discussion before we move to public comment? Mayor Pro Tem? No? Well, Trustee Wiegert, for the portion of the agenda we have control over, we've come in at 2 hours and 15 minutes. So I think we're doing a pretty good job today.
If it pleases the board, I'm looking back at my notes just to make sure. Did we vote on the emergency ordinance establishing the fire ban? I know we did. We did. Okay, I may just not be seeing it. Okay, good enough. Okay, there it is. Got it. Thank you.
All right, so at this time, we're going to open the meeting for public comment. Comments are limited to 3 minutes. I do see a couple of hands up. We will start with Lisa Merrill. Lisa, I'm promoting you to panelist now. If you unmute yourself, you have the floor.
Hi there, everybody. Thanks. I didn't expect to talk tonight, but I believe that I heard you talk about the trail extension, that it would go on to block 6, regardless of who owned it. And it is my understanding that no, that would not be included. And so I wanted to make sure that what I'm understanding is true.
As currently written, that is true.
Okay, great. Thank you.
So, Administrator Ryder, to clarify, could you say what is true? Because there were 2 statements and I just want to make sure that.
Lot 6 is a block that is currently owned by Silverton Lakes RV. It is private land that is not being conveyed to us as discussed, primarily for the purpose that it could be ultimately conveyed potentially to the Merrills from Silverton Lake RV. Our current Riverwalk easement that goes through, because the lot sorry, block 6 is still owned by the Heimbaughs, that easement extends onto that property and would be there in perpetuity. Does that make it clear?
Wait, so now I am thoroughly confused. So you are saying that it would continue on to block 6. That's not what I understood earlier.
Yes, no, block 6 will have a trail easement over it as currently written in these documents. Because the easement deals with land currently owned by Silverton Lakes RV that is not being conveyed in the quitclaim deed over to the town.
All right, thanks.
Thank you, Lisa. All right. The next comment we have is from Melody Skinner. Melody, if you unmute yourself, you now have the floor.
Shane, I believe you earlier said that you were working on having meetings that were at 2 hours and basically not more. My response to that is, gee, Toto, I don't think I'm in Silverton anymore.
It's a goal. It's not a hard rule.
In 40 years, things have changed.
Well, thank you, Melody. Is there any other comment? Sounds like no. All right,
No,
thank you,
they're good.
Melody.
Oh.
I have one more set of hands up from Jim and Amy Loki. If you unmute yourselves, you now have the floor.
Okay, I want to thank you guys for.
We heard you for a moment, but you cut back out. If you could start over.
I would like to thank the board for stretching it tonight. I know it was hard. What I would like to present tonight is here at the Red Mountain, what we have set up here on our property. We do have an example for the fire rings, the propane ring, the charcoal rings. We have this all set up right here on our property for the town board if they would like to come by and view that so that they could take a better understanding of what is going on in a developed area with our campgrounds here and the safety of it. We would like to invite all of the town board members to come by and take a look at that. Is that might be possible for you guys? We're here during the day. We'd be real happy to show you all those different fire rings, charcoal rings, fire pits that are incorporated in the developed areas. And we have a display, and we'd like to once again entertain that to you guys to come by and take a look at that.
Thank you. I saw a bunch of nodding heads.
Thank you for the invitation, Jim.
All right. Well, thank you. And I see one more hand from Sheriff Conrad.
Yeah, mine's just a clarification on the process. So this is a second reading at the moment, if I understand correctly. So I guess I'm trying to figure out what's next and what is still available for public input and input from adjacent landowners. As I said, I was a little in the dark. I know it's been a busy time for all, and it might be my fault I'm in the dark. But I was a little in the dark as to the changes that were made in the executive session. And it sounds like another property owner in Lisa is also unaware of some of the things that were done in that session. So I guess my question now is what's left for our input in this whole process now that we're at a second reading?
Yeah, Sheriff Conrad, this is the first reading. It should the board I think is approved to go on to the second reading, which would be a full public hearing opportunity. So July 27th, the second reading will be on the agenda, at which point the public will have full opportunity to comment on all issues related to this.
Understood. And all the information is readily available at Town Hall. I assume I could stop by and get a packet that clearly lays it out.
Yes.
Yep, all these documents we went over tonight were in the board packet. And yeah, anyone who's listening and anyone in the public, we would really like you to take a look at these and make sure you understand them and ask the questions you have at the next meeting. Any other public comment at this time? Trustee Harper?
I'd like to close this as soon as possible as a birthday gift for Trustee Wiegert.
Very good. I would send this by an email afterwards, so I might as well just note it, but it sounds like from Sheriff Conrad's comments and Trustee Lashley's comments, it might be a good idea for the town to send someone over to take a look at the stage 2 wetlands area on the map and make sure that there isn't additional liability exposure to the town based on this deal not being done and potential additional damages to wetlands. And since we've been put on notice by 2 official people, I think we now have an obligation to investigate.
Mayor, are you suggesting a field trip?
by town staff. I honestly can't identify wetlands or non-wetlands, so I would be very little help, but if you'd like me there, I will be there. With that,
So
thank
I'm
you
sorry,
all.
Mayor Furman, just to clarify, are you directing staff to do this investigation or certain trustees? I wasn't clear.
I was suggesting that it sounds like we've been put on notice as a town that there might be further liability being created by the use of Silverton Lakes RV, possibly not, but with Sheriff Conrad saying that he thought that was his impression too. I would just like to be on record saying it sounds like we should investigate that.
I think that's an excellent idea, Mayor Furman.
Hopefully there's nothing wrong happening, but I think it'd be a good idea to take a look.
We've been in a bad situation before for overlooking, so better to check.
Happy birthday, Jess.
Happy birthday, Jess.
Our Administrator Ryder, are you looking for board consensus on that thought, or
no, I'll investigate.
All right, on this awkward note, I will conclude this meeting of the Silverton Board of Trustees, July 13th meeting. Thank you all for participating.
Thank you.
Thank
Happy
you.
birthday, Jess. Thanks.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday, Jess.